climate change plays a very big role and impact across sectors, even including the financial sector. So we have quite some initiative that I'll be sharing through in my presentation on what the government and CCD as the coordinating agency have worked together with the mining, oil and gas sector, and also with the financial institutions through the Bank of Papua New Guinea. So basically, I'll be focusing my discussions around sustainable transition to strategic investments and also the experiences and opportunities in Papua New Guinea and all of it in a global context. What are our requirements are as well, what our commitments are in terms of us being a member to the Paris Agreement, what are our obligations as a country, as a party to the agreement, and that in a way imposes those obligations and commitments as well on the sectors that we regulate in our regulatory mandate. Next slide. Where do I do this?
It's just the green button, Debra.
Here?
Sorry, the green button. Oh, this one, the big one. There you
go. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with technology.
Do you need help, Debra? Just the red button to go back, Debra.
All right.
Do you want me to, Debra, do you want me to do it for you and you just cue me? I'll do the slides for you.
Yeah, maybe that will be better.
Thank you.
Next slide. All right, so basically understanding what the organization does in terms of our mandate. We, the Climate Change and Development Authority, is a coordinating agency. We coordinate, and under the Climate Change Management Act, we have our mandate to regulate across around almost to 10 sectors. So in regulating those sectors, meaning we provide regulations, framework in order for us to implement our mitigation and adaptation obligations as a country. One of our key role, and I would really touch on three of the most important role that CCDA play, is to our reporting obligation back to the global community through the UNFCCC process. All parties to the Paris Agreement have an obligation to report back on what our mitigation actions are and what our adaptation actions are as a country. Most importantly is the mitigation actions and our inventory, GHG inventory. The data itself is very important as it plays a very significant role in terms of informing what policies that the government should impose in order for us to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So basically that leads us to implementing and regulating in terms of designing plans, policies in line with our climate adaptation, climate mitigation targets, and providing the legislative framework for us to operate in country. Next slide. So with those reporting requirements, we see that we do not really have to prove statistically in terms of the impacts that we face as a country, but science needs to be told in order for us to actually be part of the global community, be interactive, and be getting the needed finance that we need to implement our climate action. But the impacts are faced within the country, and we feel it each and every day. And it not only affects our local communities, but also big sectors that we are together in this room. We've been hearing discussions for the last couple of days, the last 3 days, and we see the impact that climate change as well, brought to the sectors in terms of a good example will be the Mulitaka earthquake, which cut off the new Porgera mine. Those are challenges that we have to plan for. We have to ensure that we prepare ourselves in order for us to withstand those impacts that we face. The frequency of the impacts of climate change is happening at a very faster rate, and that is something that the sectors need to ensure that they work together with us to provide those mitigation actions that each of the sectors need to take in order to protect your agencies, your companies, the resources that are within the sectors. Papua New Guinea is amongst the most vulnerable, I'd say, countries in the world. And we are a small island developing. Let me rephrase it. The Prime Minister keeps telling us that we're not a small island, but we're a big island developing country, which is true in a sense that we're big, and the impacts that we face is, like I said, is very evident in our daily life, as at the community level and at the national level and in our sectors that we see each and every day. Next slide. So that's in terms of our adaptation vulnerability at stake as a country. In terms of our mitigation reporting requirements and obligation, we also note that we contribute at the global level at a very insignificant rate. Currently, we have a 0.001% of CO2 equivalent that we contribute to the global emission level. However, we are a growing economy. And whilst we are growing, we also need to be very considerate of what actions we are taking. Project Sense have shown that we will actually be a growing economy, and estimates from those sectors that we regulate. So there's currently 5 sectors that CCDA regulates and report back to UNFCCC, and that is inclusive of the energy and the agriculture, forestry, and other land use, which are the most highly emitting sectors in country. Whilst we are an emitting, talking about the emissions that we have in the sectors, we also note that there's a lot of potentials as well that we have that we can actually mitigate and lower those emissions as we go along. Next slide. So in order for us to actually get there, we have to ensure that we have very effective, very strategic plans and policies that should be in place to ensure that it guides us in implementing. So the Climate Change and Development Authority is amongst, and as a nation is amongst one of the very few countries that have actually have a target of net zero by 2050, and we have a target of at least 50% carbon neutral by 2030. That's like 5 years from now. Very ambitious, but our targets are conditional given our developing state national circumstances. So we have very ambitious target, like I said, because in the energy sector, and we're very concentrating on 2 sectors. Going back to my previous slide, those 2 sectors are actually the contributing sectors in terms of our emission estimates currently. Hence, our focus is around those 2 sectors on how do we limit or cut down on the emissions from those sectors. So we have 70% of renewable energy by 2030, and we have 25%, which is almost equivalent to 10,000 gigagrams of CO2 equivalent in the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. Whilst we concentrate on our mitigation targets, we also note the vulnerability in terms of adaptation. So we have 4 sectors which we have actually identified under our enhanced NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions, which we have key plans and activities on how we want to achieve quantifiable targets under those 4 sectors. And those 4 sectors are the infrastructure sector, the health sector, agriculture, and transport sector. There's a number of presentations around the energy sector and the transport sector, and we have actually done a lot of work as a coordinating agency with the key implementing agencies in those sectors on actually how best we can reach our targets that we have identified in our NDCs. So for the matter, you take the infrastructure sector. The roads and highways, or the Department of Works, is actually the lead sector in implementing the key targets that we have identified in our NDCs. So they have actually, as a commitment, structured or developed a climate change policy within the sector. So with the Connect PNG program, we are working hand in hand in ensuring that the infrastructures that are built and connecting the country have to be climate resilient and climate proofing in terms of the bridges, the culverts, and the roads that they are working on in building and connecting the country. So those are some of the examples on how CCDA is working together with the key lead agencies in implementing the climate change policies within the country. Also, from the policy level up to having a legislative framework that governs us as an agency, and also given us the regulatory powers on working together with 8 sectors, 8 to 9 sectors, sorry. So the Climate Change Management Act was enacted back in 2015, and that gives the authority to CCDA to be a regulatory agency in terms of managing climate change actions in country. And that is inclusive of the energy sector, the transport sector, the petroleum and oil and gas sector. So those are all the sectors that we, as a regulatory agency, regulate under, or regulate those sectors. Next slide. So in terms of what we have actually done from our vulnerability assessment and knowing the impacts that we have faced and developing those policies in line with those data that we have actually to address those impacts that we face, what are we currently doing in terms of managing climate change adaptation mitigation actions in country? So basically, we are revising our NDCs at the moment, and that's a requirement under the Paris Agreement Article 13, of which countries have to provide back to UNFCCC mid-10-year period in the revised NDCs on how we have actually progressed implementation in the last last 5 years, and we still have another 5 years because our NDCs run for a 10-year period. So that's exactly what CCDA is doing, and also, like I mentioned at the earlier opening of my presentation, is not only focusing on those sectors, but also working with the financial institutions, which I have a slide later on that I wanted to focus my discussions as well on how we have worked together with the financial sector. So, sorry, this is 6. So some of the things that we have actually done in terms of our NDCs, in terms of our development in regulations that enables us to regulate. So we have the Act, but we have regulations that we need to develop. And one of which I wanted to actually spend some time on talking is the carbon markets regulation. And the carbon markets regulation is a very important legislative framework that actually governs the implementation of carbon markets in country. So when you talk about carbon markets, it's a whole bottle full of different market approaches in one. So you have the voluntary market or the project arrangements that are there. You have the national or the compliance market that is out there. You have the previously CDM or the Clean Development Mechanism, now in transition with the Paris Agreement, sustainable development mechanisms. And you also have the international or ITMOS arrangements, internationally transferred mitigation option. It's a mouthful, crazy. So that's those articles under the Paris Agreement that forms the whole carbon market element in terms of how a country at the domestic level can manage that. We have this regulation that governs that. It is yet to be fully endorsed, and I wouldn't say that it's already being at the implementation stage, but we have actually got a endorsement, not formally, but informally announcement that the regulation has actually passed through to NEC. So that is basically that framework that governs and is an interest that most of the industries that we have started work on with actually have an interest around how do we best attract investment into the country using this regulatory framework, and also how do we at the national level domestically work with industries on getting sustainable development mechanisms, incentives out as well back to the companies as a spin-off, and also to the people at the local level. So those market approaches that we have identified in the carbon markets regulation governs and have an established process on how CCDA will work together with the sectors in implementing. And one of the examples under this carbon markets regulation framework is the ITMOS arrangement, or like I said, the internationally transferred mitigation options, and that is operationalizing Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. The government have actually started off with an MOU arrangement, and now we have an implementation agreement, actually an LOA between two countries already, which is the Singapore government and the Japan government. So those arrangements actually provides that environment of investment for private sector companies, resource sectors within the two countries to actually agree on offsetting carbon emissions from the sectors. So that is a very key element or legislative framework that actually was missing for some time, but having that now and what CCDA have put in place is really a way forward for us on how we see getting sectors involved and actually implementing as well the sustainable development initiatives. Next slide. Whilst we provide those opportunities, I just wanted to just touch on some of the mitigation initiative, but also it, in a way, sustain the climate adaptation mitigation actions in country in terms of implementation. Whilst we note the progress that we have made, there's already challenges that we have faced, that we've faced for almost 2-3 decades over time. And one of which is ensuring that we have a sustainable financial mechanism that runs in, year out, to actually finance climate change actions within the country. We have a very big challenge in terms of implementation, and climate finance sits at the very top of those challenges. As a government, we have limited financial capacity to actually implement. We have a lot of numbers that we see on media that there is this amount that is given to the country in terms of implementing climate action. But the fact that, and I see people from Waigani sitting here, we don't see those in Waigani. It's managed by different fund managers. I call them fund managers, so implementing agencies. And they at most times you get the the funders to actually take the lead in what actually they want to see. So how does our people at the local level benefit actually from those support that we have received? So those challenges we have faced over the years, hence for us is, in order to get there, in order for us to be a resilient economy, a resilient society, we have to ensure that we provide as well mechanisms, and as per our mandates and in a regulatory role, it is an imperative for us to also ensure we drive financial revenue initiatives that we, as a mandated authority, can manage to collect and implement and work together with sectors. So as on the slide is a very, it's not massive, but it is something that the government can work together with the communities in ensuring that we design projects that will have an impact to the communities. We have the upper authority to ensure that projects, especially that we are having difficulties in terms of adaptation, they can be designed by the government and that can be implemented using those financial mechanisms that we have regulated. Next slide. So whilst working on those fees and structures in terms of our tax and non-tax revenues, we also are working together with the financial institutions. So one of the key activities which we have progressed over the years, last year till this year, is actually the Green Finance Center that was established under the Bank of Papua New Guinea. That is one of our way forward in terms of the government coordinating and working together with the financial institutions. And we, under this arrangement, provides the green taxonomy policy. So the taxonomy policy provides that framework which can be used together with the banks. And we have a number of banks that have actually signed on MOUs with us to ensure that implementation in terms of getting private sectors involved through subsidized loans can be a process arranged through this green taxonomy policy. So that green finance sector is actually established to be a coordinating mechanism that mobilizes climate finances into that governance system, and that can be utilized by the banks in terms of subsidizing the activities under the taxonomy. So that is something that we are working together with the banks. There's a lot of risk involved, but the best way is for us to start and actually see how best we can get the banking sector involved, which they have actually been part of this whole process. So that is an amazing piece of way forward in terms of getting the financial sector involved. I don't know if I have a lot of time still on me. Next slide. So whilst we work on implementing those policies and strategies and frameworks, legislative frameworks at the national level, there is also a link to international commitments. So companies, let's take the arrangements between the PNG and the Singapore government, or let's take a company that is going to, or that is manufacturing steel or cement to actually export to another country, given in a European country. You also have companies on the other side that ensure there is reporting requirements as well. So those are some of the areas that we are actually looking into, how best we can work with the companies, with the sectors in transitioning and ensuring that as party to the Paris Agreement, we honor those commitments that we have made, and we work together with the sectors to ensure that we provide that conducive environment for development and for exportations as well. And that is one of the key activities that we will be working towards in the coming years with the sectors. Next slide. Yeah, so basically, in terms of what we are working on at the, sorry, let me just set this. At the national level and at the international level, in terms of ensuring that we honor those commitments that we have made and ensure that we work through with the sectors on setting up policies and frameworks and working together with them to provide those enabling framework for them as a government agency to operate and work within the country. So we aim to have a carbon neutral society by 2050, as I mentioned. So in order to get there, we have to ensure that we are in queue with the international standards that are set out there. And the panel members, in our discussion, we will discuss more on how the private sector is actually being involved and what, as a government agency, what is the role of CCDA to ensure those international standards are being domesticated well in country, and how those private sectors can actually come in and invest in country. So that is the whole way forward on how we want to ensure that we become a carbon neutral society by 2050. Next slide. So in terms of how we want to attract those private sectors by providing the enabling environment for them, we also note that we have a very big potential in country in terms of our renewable energy sources, in terms of our forest itself. And those are the key elements that stands out for the country to attract investment within Papua New Guinea. And we are at that level where, in terms of discussions and getting the investors into the country, we speak about how we've been doing conservation even for a number of years, even decades. Our grandparents have lived through, and they have conserved the forest that we now see as one of the third largest rainforest country in the world. And that is the potential that is there, that we would like investment through those agreements that we have signed to actually invest in developing these largest resources that we have in country. Next slide. I think that's actually the last slide is actually my last slide. So if you can go back. Yeah, so actually in order for us to work together in implementing what we have already been implementing and what we intend to implement in terms of honoring our commitments and in terms of ensuring that we provide the enabling framework in line with the international obligations, we need to work together in a very strong partnership that we can collaborate together at the national level. Also, in terms of strategies, we have an environment where we would like sectors and companies to work together with the government agencies on how best we design strategies that will help you and that will also help us as a country in mitigating and adapting to climate change. And ensuring that whatever framework that you have at the private sector company level, which I note from the presentations over the days where how companies have actually have targets in the inventory targets in their own sectors. But also we have to note that they are targets at the international level and also of which we have domesticating it, that we have to ensure we align ourselves and work together to achieve those targets within your sectors and also as a government in our obligations. So with that, I think that brings me to the end of my presentation, and be happy to take on questions and discussions after the panel. Thank you.